The storm and winds may...
Hi, I'm Terry Townsend, minister here at the New Concord Church of Christ in New Concord, Ohio. I want to personally thank you for joining us today via this live stream. The purpose of this stream is to simply share the good news of Jesus Christ. While we appreciate you viewing this stream, this effort is in no way intended to be a substitute for the assembling together with the saints. We recognize, however, that there are circumstances that arise that might prevent someone from attending church service. And for this reason, we provide a means whereby people like you can hear the gospel preached. We hope you enjoy today's message from God's Word. Please feel free to share this stream. If you're ever in the New Concord, Ohio area, we'd love for you to drop by and visit with us. We meet every Sunday morning beginning at 9:15 a.m. for Bible class, again at 10 a.m. for worship, and again 6 p.m. for our evening worship. See you soon.
You hold me in your mighty arms, forever safe from harm.
Good morning. Today's reading will be Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. I will be reading from the New King James Version. Again, that's Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witness, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God.
Good morning. It's nice to see everybody. I mentioned in class this morning that I know some faces. I was pointed out that there are some old faces here. I didn't say that. Those are not my words. Those are somebody else's. But I'm grateful to get to be with you today. Thank you for inviting me and my family to come and spend some time with you today. So hopefully we'll give you things to think about and some challenges to our thoughts as we study God's Word. But we're going to spend our time this morning just in Hebrews chapter 12. We're not going to venture very far away from that, as it was just read just a minute ago from Hebrews chapter 12. The book of Hebrews is one of my favorite books to study. So rich, so many things to think about, so many things, just even in the small words and the phrases that the writer uses, either to describe Jesus or to describe sort of our comparison of the new way of living, the new law compared to the old law. So many different topics and ideas to challenge our thinking from the book of Hebrews. And Hebrews 12 is one of those places where just in these two verses that were read just a minute ago, just in these two places, you could spend a lot of time dealing with all kinds of different things and thinking about all kinds of different things. You know, we could talk about the cloud of witnesses, right? This great cloud of witnesses that's mentioned usually in reference to Hebrews chapter 11 and all the things that come before. Tonight, we're going to talk about the cloud of witnesses, maybe in a way that is unique, maybe a way that you've not thought about it. We're going to ask ourselves tonight, if we are part of this great cloud of witnesses, or to put ourselves in the shoes of the great cloud of witnesses that play an important role for encouraging the saints that are around them. And so we could talk about that. We could spend a lot of time there. We could spend our time talking about what it means to lay aside every weight and the sin which easily entangles us or ensnares us. We could talk about those kinds of things and have great application. We could talk about the simple idea that how sin is a snare, right? And the idea that sin has its way to grab a hold of you and hold on and to drag you down and to prevent you from going forward. That's an easy application point and things to think about. We could talk about certain aspects of Jesus' identity, or talk about the endurance and the pressing on, right? This idea of fixing our eyes on Jesus and pressing on valiantly with great endurance. And all those things would be wonderful things to think about. But today we're going to talk about one little idea, a little aspect of Jesus' identity. I say little, I don't mean little, but just one simple phrase from this passage that the apostle almost says in passing. It's not even the point of the passage. We're not really going to talk about the whole context of this passage, which ends up being this idea that Jesus disregarded all the shame and humiliation that he was going to have to endure. But it simply came to live and to die on the cross so that we might have an example of this great endurance. We're not going to deal with that great context today, but just this one phrase, right? Think about again. Since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let's lay aside every weight and the sin which clings to us so closely. And let's run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before us endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. One little phrase, almost in passing. He calls Jesus the author and the finisher of our faith. Some versions might say the founder and the perfecter of our faith. There's all kinds of different ways to read that, mainly because we don't really have an English word to translate this idea of what it means when the author says Jesus is the author and the perfecter, or author and finisher of our faith. It's hard for us to really come to grips with what the author is trying to say, what the writer of the book of Hebrews is trying to get across. And as we said, we don't have English words that really help us understand exactly what's being said. But there's so much richness, so much to think about when we try to understand Jesus' identity or try to understand his power and try to understand who he is to his people with just these two little words. And so today I just want to dig in and just ask ourselves, what does it mean for Jesus to be the author of our faith, or to Jesus to be the finisher of our faith? Because that's a kind of a strange concept. To be the author of my faith? I thought this faith was mine. Or to be the finisher of my faith. It's weird for him to be the finisher of something that is mine. And so that's kind of a strange concept. Let's think for a few minutes today just on those two words to ask ourselves, what are we trying to get? What are we trying to understand? What does this teach us about who Jesus is? To think about him as the author and finisher of our faith. Number one, let's just think about what it means for him to be the author. It's a strange word because this word shows up one other time in the book of Hebrews, and it shows up in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 10, where he's called the captain of our salvation. If you recognize that phrase, sometimes we sing a song even sometimes about Jesus being our captain. It's the same word that shows up here, the captain or the author. This one's a little bit of a variation because he's not the captain of our salvation here. He's the captain of our faith, or the author of our faith. As we noted here, it has several different ideas. The word here can mean many different things. So think about maybe the author, or sometimes we think the originator, like as someone who writes a book, right? The author of a book is somebody who sits down and puts the words to page. It's from their own mind. It's from their own, it's coming out of their own thoughts. They're the ones, all the words on the page of the book originate with them. They are the author. So we might think about him as the originator. The word we mentioned a minute ago, the captain, right? What does a captain do? I think of pirate ships, and for whatever reason, that's what comes to my mind. The captain who stands on the ship and spins the big wheel. Wouldn't you love to spin one of those big wheels? I always thought it'd be fun to just spin one of those things and turn the boat sideways. He's the captain. He's the one who's in charge. He's the one who stands. Everybody answers to him. He's the one who turns the boat or steers the boat or determines which way it's going to go. It also has an idea where sometimes it's called the pioneer of our faith, if some of your versions might translate it that way, where he is the pioneer of our faith. When I used to live, we used to live in southern West Virginia, down in Greenbrier County, which is a wonderful place to live, but it's pretty rural, and it's out in the mountains, and we had friends who lived in farms up there, and I used to just to go up with my friends, and we would ride horse. Some of my favorite memories, riding horses up to the top of these mountains, and you'd look out and just trees as far as you can see, up and down these mountain, sides and up, and just as far as you can see. And I used to just think about, what if you were one of our American pioneers to show up on these mountains and look out and say, yeah, that looks like a good place to live. Which is you can't see anything but trees, and how they would have to cut down all these massive trees just to have a place. They are the pioneers, right? They're the ones who, and the word actually can mean the trailblazer. The one who sets out and cuts down everything in front and makes the trail in front of you. That's the idea. All of these things are, you see, when we just say author of our faith, it's not enough, is it? It doesn't really get the idea of everything that Jesus' identity is, it's encompassed in Jesus' identity. The trailblazer, the one who's going on ahead and making the path for us. And so all these ways we can understand who Jesus is. Let's focus on just a couple here. The idea that I think that give us an interesting way for application. Think about Jesus as the originator of our faith. The one from which our faith always flows. Or sometimes we might use the word the basis of our faith, right? One that is the foundation of our faith. The one that everything, all of our faith, everything that amounts, it begins with Him. And it has to begin with Him. It has to start with Jesus. We might think of Him, the author, in that in a very broad way, He is the author of faith, but in a really, really personal way. He is the originator and the foundation and the basis of my faith. It has to start with Him, right? He is the basis and the foundation of all faith, but more importantly, He's the foundation of my faith. Everything else is built on Him. So anybody who wishes, in this world, anybody who wishes to come to faith has to be confronted with the really simple idea that this man whom we call Jesus, the man was lived in Nazareth, was called Jesus, was born in Bethlehem, raised in Nazareth as a carpenter. We have to come to grips with the fact that this guy who was called Jesus is actually more than just a guy who was called Jesus. And we have to ask ourselves this basic question: who is He? Who is Jesus? That sounds like a really elementary question. It sounds like something that's sort of, of course that's the question. Who is Jesus? We know who Jesus is. He is the Savior. He is the Christ. He is the Messiah. All of those things. But for a person who doesn't know Him, for a person who's not been raised in a country where He's always in front of them, these are questions that have to be addressed. Who is He? And when it comes down to it, people who maybe are raised sitting in these pews and sit here and listen to sermons all their lives, all of us have to come to grips with the question: who is He, really? Is He just the man who lived and was a great teacher? Is He a man who was a crazy person and didn't really know what He was talking about? Is He a liar and has deceived the rest of the world into thinking that He's something that He is not? Or is He really the Lord of all creation? Is He really the Lord of my life? Is He really the Son of God? Questions that are real questions that everybody has to answer. Everybody has to come to grips with it. I think about it in terms of the Apostle Paul. So in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, there's this great passage that we often call the resurrection chapter, right? Where Paul is dealing with the fact that there's some resistance from people about whether the resurrection is something that really happened, or whether it really will happen, or whether Jesus really did rise. And Paul begins this sort of argument talking about the resurrection by saying, I delivered to you, 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 3, I delivered to you as of first importance that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that He was buried, and that He rose again on the third day according to the Scriptures. Some of the old versions will say, I delivered to you first of all. As in, I'm going to make a list in the things that we begin. The word actually means, and the ESV it translates it that way. I'm going to tell you about something that is the most important thing. I'm giving to you the thing that is of first importance beyond anything else, above anything else, that you have to know. That this man named Jesus died, he was buried, but he didn't stay in the grave. He rose again. If you think about Jesus as the author or the originator or the basis or the foundation of faith, it has to start somewhere, doesn't it? If you're a person, and we have to think about it, everything begins with learning who he is, what he has done, how he has lived, what kind of relationship he has with his people, what kind of relationship does he want with me, what is he doing now, how do I serve him now. All of these things have to do with his identity, but not just his broad identity, but who he is to me. If I don't answer those questions, then I don't respond to those questions. And if I don't respond to those questions, I'm not part of his family. I don't really come to grips with who he is. So before anything else, as American people, we are in contact with church all our lives, almost all the time, whether you're raised in church or not. Everybody comes in contact with this. But before anything else, before anything, we learn the rules of church or the rules of how things function, or before we learn anything about worship or even about moral living, before we even learn to be good people, the thing that is most important, as of first importance, is that Jesus of Nazareth was not just Jesus of Nazareth, but that he was Son of God, come to this earth to die, to be buried, and to rise again, so that we might follow in his footsteps. Everything has to begin with that. And so when we say Jesus is the author of our faith, or the basis of our faith, I think that's a good idea to think, a good way to think about it. That it all has to begin with him. And if we learn all the things that the way that we are supposed to live, or the way that we're supposed to act in church, or the way the church functions, or how the elders work, or how we should worship, all those things are vitally important for living in God's family. If you take the fact that Jesus is the Lord of your life out of it, doesn't really mean anything. If Jesus is not who he said he was, and if we're not willing to accept who he said he was. Later on in this chapter, in this very chapter, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul is actually going to say, they're sort of making the argument that the resurrection is not happening. And he's saying, no, listen, we can go through all this list. If Jesus did not rise, if he's not who he said he was, and if I don't accept who he said he was, then our faith is in vain. Faith is empty. And our lives, he says, we are of all people, most pitiable people. The world should have unbelievable pity on us if our Savior is not who he said he was, and if I'm not willing to accept that. And so when we say he is the author of our faith, we think about being connected to him as the foundation. Think about the image. It's a familiar one. In John chapter 15, Jesus tells this parable, sort of a parable, where he calls himself the vine. Do you remember that idea? Right? He calls himself the vine, and we are the what? The branches, right? He is the vine, and we are the branches. 8 times in that little parable, he makes reference to, there's a lot of application in that passage, but we are the branches. He is the vine itself. 8 times he says our duty or our role or the most important thing is that the vine be connected to, or the branches be connected to the vine. Over and over and over again, he says the phrase, abide in me, abide in the vine, abide in my love, be connected to the vine, abide in me. Over and over and over again, he gives this emphasis that I am the thing that matters most. If you lose that connection with me, then you are, in the words of the parable, fruitless, worthy of being clipped away from the vine and thrown in the fire. That's the parable, right? That if we are not connected to him, if we don't understand him as the foundation, then all the other things we know and do don't matter. Because everything begins with Jesus. And that has to be where it starts. He is the author, the foundation, the founder, the originator, the basis of all faith, but most importantly, my faith. and your faith. He's the author of our faith. Think about another way. Think of him as the author, as being the great example. We think of Jesus as we mentioned the idea there, being the pioneer, the one who goes out before anybody else, or the one who blazes the trail in front of us to cut down all the things and to make the path so that it's easier for the people to follow behind me. Isn't that what Jesus did in many ways? If he is the captain of our faith, or the author, or the trailblazer, or the pioneer of faith, we see him as the one who has gone ahead of us. Right? The one who has come to earth and said, live like I will have lived. It wasn't just a God who from on high declared a whole bunch of rules that we're supposed to follow. It wasn't just a big list of things that was thrown in our lap and said, this is what you have to do, good luck. No, it's not the way it worked. Right? We have a God who made himself like us, to come down from heaven and to be with us and to live with us and to be and to live a life of faith. What does a life of faith look like? It looks like Jesus' life. What does a life of love and service and sincerity look like? It look like Jesus' life. We've got the example to follow. He is the pioneer of faith. He lived the life of faith so that we can walk in his footsteps and follow along behind him. I think about this, it gets to the truly important and identifying work of Jesus, in that he was one who, as we think about, is this great mediator. You know the term mediator? This is the beautiful idea. This is a beautiful picture of Jesus. The idea of the one who stands between. There's this great passage in the book of Job, and we don't have to read it this morning. I believe it's in Job 17, where Job is talking with God, and you know the story of Job, where Job has been suffering unimaginably, and he's just overcome with all kinds of pain and suffering and these terrible things that he's having to go through. And the worst part of it is he has no idea why, and he can't figure it out. And he's got friends that are saying, that's because you're a sinner, Job, you're messing it up. And Job has to say, it's not. I've not done anything wrong. I don't deserve it. And then he begins to say things to God that you and I would just shudder at saying. If you've ever read the book, when you're kids, we learn that Job is the man of great patience, right? And that means something different when I was a kid. A man of great patience in my mind is the old gentlemanly grandfather that, never gets upset when the grandkids break the glass. Just gentle and patient. If you ever read the book of Job, you could not be more opposite of that. Where Job is the man of great endurance, where he endures all these things, but Job lashes out at God. And he screams at God, and he says things to God that you and I would be afraid to even think. And he just accuses God, and he doesn't understand, and he begins to say, this is your fault. I'm suffering because of you. You're letting me do this. Why are you who's letting all this happen to me? I don't deserve this. And he begins to just, in anger and misunderstanding, it's the human experience. It's human life. Because we all have to deal with these questions. But one of the things he says in the middle of this is, he says, here I am. I'm suffering. He said, I would like to be able to come, to try to, have an understanding between you and I, God. But he says, you're not like me. I can't take you to court with God so that somebody can stand here and decide this. I can't do that. What I need is, he said, we don't have a mediator to stand between us. That was the words of Job. I would like to be able to have this discussion so that I can defend myself, but I can't do that because I don't have anybody to stand between us. We don't have a mediator until we get to the New Testament, right? There's this great passage when the Apostle Paul, when he's talking about Jesus, he's talking about him and he calls him, we have one God, right? And one Savior. He calls him the man, Jesus Christ. One mediator between God and man. The man, Jesus Christ. You know why Jesus is so importantly understanding, or important in coming here and living with us? Because at the same time he is God, but yet he is also me and one of us. So that when Job has to say, you're not like me, there is nobody who can lay his hand on both of us. There's nobody who can put his hand on you and on me because you are God and I am man. I need somebody who's both of us. And yet we have Jesus Christ, who is both of us. And so when we say Jesus is the pioneer of our faith, we say he is God who showed up here to live just like me and walk just like me and be tempted just like me, so that I know how to do it, so that I can follow after him and I can understand that. So when we say he's not the one who stood from on high and said, this is how you do it, do this, he's one who would come down and say, come go with me. I'll show you how to do it. Let me show you what it means to love sincerely, genuinely, and sacrificially. Let me show you what it means to serve without expecting anything. Let me show you what it means to trust God fully, without any exception, and to follow him without any reservation. Let me show you what it means to take up your cross and follow. Jesus is the author of our faith. You see why we say it doesn't really, it's not enough to just say, yeah, he's the author of our faith. He is the one upon whom it is all based. He is the foundation. It begins with him. And it begins with him being willing to say, follow me. Let me show you. He is God, and yet he is us. And that's what makes him special. So Jesus is the author of our faith. Let's think about the second word there. That's just the first word. That's one word, folks. Think about it. Just the second idea. Not only let's lay aside every weight and the sin which easily clings to us, and let's run with endurance, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the founder, and the second word, the perfecter of our faith, or the author or the finisher of our faith. This word only occurs here in the Greek language. It's nowhere else. It's not in any classical Greek literature. It's not anywhere else in the New Testament. It's the only place it ever shows up is right here. And the writer to the Hebrews uses it to describe who Jesus is. One writer defines it this way. Let me read it to you. This is a technical definition. He says it is anyone who takes any scheme or enterprise and brings it to a full and perfect and complete consummation. In other words, he said, this person who is the finisher or the perfecter is the one who takes something and he's begun something and he doesn't just let it languish. But this person lifts it up and brings it to its full and complete and perfect and finished state. So my little daughter, Lindy's my third daughter, she's back there. Lindy's favorite book for a long time was this book called Lindy's Happy Ending. You can tell why it might have been her favorite book. Her name is Lindy. So Lindy's Happy Ending, it tells the story about this little girl who has all the energy in the world and is so excited to begin projects and to do things with people. And so the book tells the story about this, how she has all these wonderful ideas and great enthusiasm and great energy, only to get, as she's moving along, to get distracted in the midst of her doing things. Anybody else get distracted in the middle of projects? We know what that's like. She gets distracted and she gets off course, and then she ends up doing something else, and she leaves her friends here, with a mess of books. When she was supposed to clean the bookshelf, she pulled all the books off the shelf to clean them, and then got distracted and left. And so now her friends have to clean all the books. And it's the simple idea that, teaching the kids to learn to finish what they start, right? To not get distracted, but if you start something, to finish it. And we need to bring everything to a happy ending. That was the idea of Lindy's happy ending. We don't want to leave anybody with the responsibilities. We want to fulfill our responsibilities and do what's right. It's often the most important thing when we're talking about a task. If you start a task and don't finish a task, what's left of the task? Nobody wants a half-mowed yard, right? Nobody wants to have some stripes run through the yard and just left. That doesn't look good. That doesn't work right. Nobody wants something that's done halfway. If you want to start, I have a friend who he was a youth minister when I was in school, and he would come to church camp, and he would always grow, he was one of those guys who could grow a beard in a day and a half, one of those kind of people, and all week he would grow this beard, and on Friday he would shave half his face. And he would come to breakfast with a beard on this side of his face and a shaved face, and it was just to make fun, to laugh at the kids and just to have some fun, but nobody wants a beard on half of your face, right? You don't want anything halfway. Everything should be done completely. Think about, I'm a baseball fan. I love the Cubs. Are there any Indians fans in here? Oh, okay, we got some. Sorry. I was here the other day and I had my Cubs hat on, and my friend said, "Oh, I still can't look at that," right? Because the Cubs beat the Indians in the World Series a few years ago. And one of the things that, and you think about, if there's this position in baseball that makes multiple millions and millions and millions of dollars for what amounts to, oftentimes, their role in the game is to be in the game for usually about 10 minutes, right? They're the one who comes, and the reason why I bring this up, because the enormous amounts of money for this one guy to come in, to be on their team. Call him the closer. His job is to come in and get 3 outs most of the time. To come in the last inning, throw as hard as he can possibly throw, and strike out 3 people and end the game. The Cubs almost didn't win the World Series because the closer fell apart, right? And he didn't finish out the game, and it didn't work out well. It turned out well in the end, but the closer, right? He's the one who finishes. It's the one who has to finish things out. Oftentimes, if you don't finish, it's the most important part, right? You have to finish things. To be the finisher, when you think about Jesus, to be the finisher of our faith. Think about it in terms of, there's this word that the Bible uses often to describe him. They call him the first fruits. You ever heard that word, that term? They call them the first fruits, right? The things that come first. If you plant things out in the field, your first fruits would be the things that happen first, right? The things that you go out and you pick a certain percentage of, that's the first fruits of your harvest. They call Jesus oftentimes the first fruits because he is the one who has done things first. They call him the first fruits of the resurrection sometimes. You know, what does that mean? It means he's the first one to be resurrected in the way that we will, and the rest will follow. If you pick your corn first, the first fruits of the corn, and the rest will follow. The idea of Jesus being the finisher, the first fruits of our faith. Think about this earlier. Turn back a few chapters in Hebrews to chapter 2. Let's read a little paragraph here. Hebrews chapter 2. The writer says about Jesus, verse 10, Hebrews 2 and verse 10, he says, "It was fitting that he, Jesus, for whom, by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation," there's our word, the author of our salvation, perfect through suffering. Go down to verse 14. "Since, therefore, the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of those same things." In other words, we all are flesh and blood. Jesus also partook of the same things, that through his death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all of those people through fear of death were subject to slavery all their lives. In other words, the writer says, all of us are flesh and blood. All of us have to endure suffering. All of us have to endure pain. All of us have to endure death. And the privilege is, he came and he did it first. To come and to endure suffering and pain and sorrow and tears, to endure flesh and blood, and then to die. But not just to die, but to finish death. Right? To finish it. Right? He would say to die, but not just that. His death destroyed the one who had all the power over death through his resurrection to conquer, that is, the devil. And then he says, the people who are afraid of it their whole lives, the people who are afraid of that awful power and the pain of losing and leaving, through his death, he put to death all of that fear, so that the people who are held in slavery by that fear don't have to be afraid anymore. He has finished it. He has completed it. He has conquered it. He has perfected it. He is the finisher of our faith. Think about it in this way. This is maybe my favorite. This version calls him the perfecter. Think of the idea, to bring it to completion, to bring it to real meaningfulness, to bring it into something that's complete and perfect and full. Paul uses the idea of calling our attention to the faith of Abraham. Remember in Romans 4, where Paul would say, he's trying to get us to think about, not about works that we deserve the grace of God, but by the fact that, look at Abraham, he says. He believed God. He trusted in God. And God counted it for him as righteousness. Not that Abraham was righteous. It's not the point. He believed and he trusted in the Lord, and God said, okay, we'll count that as righteousness. James uses Abraham in the opposite way, but Paul uses it by saying, because of Abraham's faith, not because it was great, not because he was worthy, not because he was a righteous person, but he believed in the Lord and what the Lord said, and God counted it as righteousness for him. And Paul pleads with us to have the same kind of faith, not that we will ever be enough. That's the point. Not that we will ever be enough, or believe enough, or do enough, or work enough, or serve enough, or love enough, or be righteous enough. None of those things matter. Why? Because we have Jesus, the perfecter of our faith. Where my faith is not enough, He makes it enough. And where my righteousness is not enough, He makes it because of who He is. Because He is the finisher. He takes my faith and my weakness and my struggle and my sin and all of the things that I have to deal with, and He makes them of you. And He makes them worthwhile. And He makes me worthy of acceptance into His kingdom, where in and of myself I am so helplessly worthless and not able. But because of Him, I have value, and I am enough. And you are enough. And that's the beauty of it. He is the author of our faith, the finisher, and the completer, and the perfecter of our faith. That's what makes us full and complete. And so when you think of Jesus, and when you read this term, which again is really just an aside, it's not even the point of the passage. He just says, we need to fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him, and he begins to tell us the rest of the story. It's not even part of the passage, but think of the depth and the beauty of what it means to be part and to be a follower of this man, the author and finisher of our faith. Let me read to you one little passage here from one of my favorite author of mine named William Barclay. And it harkens back to the idea that, think about our terms here. Do you remember the statements in the book of Revelation where at the end of the Bible where Jesus is described as being the beginning and the end? Don't these make sense? The author, the beginning, the basis, the finisher, the one who finalizes it all. He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Don't they make sense? Don't you see the picture? He is the one who gives us the beginning and gives us the end, right? I'm the Alpha, the Omega, the first and the last. I am the one who lives, who was dead, and yet, behold, I am alive forevermore, in the words of Jesus. Listen to this statement from William Barclay. He writes about Jesus. He says, Jesus is at the very same time the goal of our journey, and yet also the companion for our way. He is at once the one whom we go to meet, and yet the one with whom we travel. The wonder of the Christian life is that we press on surrounded by the saints, oblivious to everything but the glory of the goal, and forever in the company of Him who has already made the journey and reached the goal, and who waits to welcome us when we reach the end. Isn't that a beautiful thought? He is there going to Him, and yet He is here with us to hold our hand while we go. He is the goal of our journey, and yet He is the purpose of our journey while we're here. It's a beautiful, beautiful thought. And so when we think of Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, think of Him as the one that matters, the foundation of all you are, the foundation of all you know and believe, and yet the one who holds your hand, and the one who lifts you up, and the one who gives you value. He is the beginning and the end, the author and the finisher of our faith. I hope you think about Jesus in that way. And I hope that as we conclude today that you'll think about Him if you've not become a believer, if you've not contemplated who He is, and how you ought to respond to Him. You have a great family of people here who would love to assist you and to help you and to teach you what it means to believe in Jesus and to obey Jesus. If you have a need to become a Christian today, these people would love to help you. If you are a person who sits in these pews and each week and maybe has not thought about the role that Jesus plays in perfecting you and the role that He plays in finishing you, let Him do that. Let Him make you whole. Let Him make you free. Let Him complete you, because that's what He is, the author and the finisher of our faith. If you have a need this morning, would you come to the front and let us know while we stand and sing?
It's the grandest thing